Hello, thank you for joining me. This training is Meeting Sensory Needs for Diverse Learners. First, I want to tell you a little bit about our organization. We support families and schools all across Kentucky. Our goal is to bridge the gap between research and practice. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Today's objectives are: participants will leave with an understanding of what sensory processing disorder is, and then the rest of the goal is to leave you with strategies and some resources that you can take back to whatever setting that you are in. The first time I heard about sensory processing disorder, I remember thinking, what is that? What does sensory processing mean? So the way that I start people off is I think about the five senses, the ones that we all tend to learn in kindergarten or first grade. So sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Other senses to consider. Proprioception is our sixth sense. Proprioception is the perception or awareness of the position of our body or the movement of our body. And we'll talk more about all of these later on. We'll break them down further. Vestibular is our seventh sense. It comes back to our sense of balance and our inner ear, sort of your head-eye coordination and being able to feel like you're stable in your environment. Interoception is the newest sense that has just been discussed most frequently in the last 2 years or less. Interoception comes down to understanding and the feeling of things that are going on inside of your body. So pain receptors, being able to feel full when you're eating, too hot, too cold, all of those come back to interoception and understanding of the feeling inside of your body. And we'll talk more about all of these later in this session. We'll break them all down and discuss ways and strategies to support students. So what is sensory processing itself? So it's the neurological process of organizing information about the sensations that we get from our body and the environment. How does that work? So on the next slide, we're going to take a look at a good example of what sensory processing looks like. So what does sensory processing look like? So this little blue star on the screen is sensory input. So in a typical person, maybe it's the hum of the air conditioner. So that's our sensory input. We're receiving the noise of the hum of the air conditioner. So next we come down to the processing point. So the processing is how sensory information is organized, interpreted, stored, and related to previous experiences. So what do we do with this information? So the hum of the air conditioner, right now it's summer and it's very hot. It's noise I hear all the time, so I relegate that to background noise. And the response that I generate is I relegate it to background noise. For me, it's just background noise, and I'm easily able to block that out. So now, for a person with sensory processing disorder, my son struggles with sensory processing disorder. It's one of the major areas that has impacted his life. So when he was younger, we were at Canada Park, a lovely older amusement park that we attend almost every year, and his dad came up, super nice guy, came up and touched his shoulder, lightly tapped him on his shoulder. So the sensory input was a light tap. The way that he processed that information, if you come down to processing, for him, that light tap was painful. It hurt. So he screamed and said, "Dad, why would you hurt me? Why would you hit me? Why would you do that to me?" But truthfully, his dad had just barely touched him, but his body processed that light touch as pain. And so the response that he generated was pain and being very upset. So you can see his sensory processing system is at that point, was very dysregulated. So I frequently get asked, who is this a concern for? Which kids are most likely to have sensory processing disorder? I always think of kids with autism. They may not all have a sensory processing disorder, but there is a high percentage that will have issues with sensory. Kids with ADHD frequently struggle with sensory processing disorder. Kids who have generalized anxiety disorder may also have sensory processing struggles. And those are the big ones that I tend to think of. There are many others, and you can also not have another comorbid disability. You can just have sensory processing disorder. That can be a standalone struggle, which, believe me, can be more than enough of a challenge. So let's take a minute and think about our own sensory system and our own ability to self-regulate. Answer these questions for yourself. Feel free to hit pause if you need to during this presentation. So what makes you feel calm after a hard day? For me, I like to read. Reading calms me down. I'm an avid reader. I'll read just about anything. So if I'm having a really hard day, then I will slip off and read for 10 minutes or a half hour, whatever amount of time I can carve out, because I know it just makes me feel calm. If that's not available, then I like to sit in a swing. We have an outdoor swing that I enjoy a lot. How do you wake yourself up during the day? So if you find yourself falling asleep, what do you do to wake yourself up? So I chew gum. If it's me that I'm talking about, I would say I like to chew gum, or ice chips sometimes will wake me up. Also, I will wash my face with a cool washcloth to wake myself up. What makes you feel disorganized or frazzled in the day? For me, having lots of trainings in a row, multiple days to where I'm doing presentations, can make me feel disorganized. Or just getting off to a bad start of the day, like having multiple things go wrong, makes me feel very frazzled. So the nice thing as adults is that probably we know how to calm ourselves down. We know how to wake ourselves up, and we kind of know triggers, right? As we grow older, we learn the things that will trigger the feeling of being disorganized or feeling frazzled. And if you have a functional sensory system and you're a fairly relative functioning adult, then you are able to address and meet those needs. So let's watch a video. On the next clip, you will see a video that walks through what is sensory processing disorder and what that might look like for a student.
Some kids are really bouncy and can't sit still. Some kids aren't very coordinated. Some see food as a pile of toxic goo that hurts their mouth and jangles their taste buds. School might be a mysterious place where things don't make much sense. If this sounds like you, you may have sensory processing disorder, and we're going to explain it here. Your body has 7 senses: vision in your eyes, hearing in your ears, touch in your skin, taste in your mouth, and smell in your nose. And you have 2 movement senses: your muscles and your sense of balance. In sensory processing disorder, these senses don't communicate right with your brain. Think of the nerves connecting your brain and senses as a set of roads. Those roads should be smooth superhighways so that the senses and brain can communicate fast. If you have sensory processing disorder, then some of your roads are bumpy and rough. You can also think of the senses as having a broken volume control. If the volume is too high, you will feel your senses too strongly. If the volume is too low, you won't feel sensation at all. In fact, you'll want more. Some kids overcome these problems as they grow older. Others need help. Help is usually occupational therapy, and it's fun. Occupational therapy helps build up the connections between your senses and your brain. The more you do, the stronger and smoother they get, kind of like paving those roads. After a while, you'll learn to slow down and sit still, to pay attention, to eat, to be comfortable and happy doing movement. It takes time. There's homework, too. But the more you work at it, the better it gets.
So for the purposes of this training, we're going to look at meeting sensory needs and struggles with sensory needs in two basic areas. So hypersensory children and hyposensory children. So sensory avoiders, and so they're going to overreact to sensory input. And sensory seekers, those kinds of students and children tend to have underreacted to sensory input. So they are constantly or frequently seeking out high amounts of sensory input. Let's take a look at red flags for our sensory avoiders. So sensory avoider students or children tend to be kids who are, everything is too bright, too loud, too smelly. They're going to worry about being bumped into by other students. They may avoid messy play such as finger painting, or if they are older, say high school age, they're the students who they don't want to put their hands in the clay during art class or touch the science experiment and process. Fearful of playground equipment. No thank you to surprise hugs and touches for these students. Those are some of the struggles, and there are many others that you might see for students who are hypersensory. Red flags for our hyposensory or our sensory seeker students. They tend to be thrill seekers, high pain tolerance. They may not have a very good understanding of personal space, so they're the students who constantly bump into the kids around them, but then may become upset when people invade their personal space. Very fidgety. They also may put objects into their mouth, especially things like their shirt. If you've ever had a student chew their shirt collar or shirt sleeves off, they may seek out messy play, so when you go outside, they're the student who finds puddles and lays down in them. Or they may look for other opportunities to play in the water fountain or in the toilet if the opportunity arises. You never quite know what sensory seekers will seek out, but they are constantly in need of a lot of sensory input. Do you know me? The most interesting thing for me when I was learning about sensory processing disorder was that most kids are not one or the other. Many kids have symptoms of sensory seeking and symptoms of sensory avoiding in the same child, which obviously makes it more complicated for the adults in the situation trying to handle and address that. So think about the kids that you know that have sensory processing disorder or had some obvious episodes or symptoms of sensory issues. What did that look like for them? How did that affect their ability to deal with their school day and to move throughout classroom settings? How does that affect learning in the home environment? What does that look like for them? So think about what that looks like for those students, and if you know of any good strategies that have worked for you in the past. So where do we go from here? Deciding on how to get started can be overwhelming, but hopefully when you leave this training today, you will have some strategies and some items that you can take away and use in whatever setting that you are in to help you get started. So don't be overwhelmed. This is a good place to start. So where do we go from here? Please remember, every child is unique. What works for one child may not work well for another. So my goal today is for you to have a variety of tools for your toolbox, a variety of strategies. So if you try something with a child or with a student and it's not successful and you've given it a really good try, then maybe you move on to another strategy. And remember, we're working in students' sensory systems. So this is a brain issue. So this can take time. There's generally not a quick fix. Unfortunately, there's not an easy button. A great place to get started with sensory processing issues is consult an occupational therapist. And I know that some schools don't have good access to that, and sometimes occupational therapists are still learning about sensory processing. So, if you have the opportunity, please consult an occupational therapist. They should be your friend. Bring them a Christmas gift, right? You want them to be your friend, especially in a school setting. They are a great resource, and I have worked with some phenomenal occupational therapists over the years. So help them to be your friend and talk to them. In your school setting, they are a great first place to go to when you have a student that you feel like is struggling with sensory processing issues.